So we're here at Slush. I'm with Simon King, partner at Lakestar, deep tech partner, I should say. And we just unveiled, or we did like a sneak preview of our European deep tech report that we do every year. Next one is coming out later next year. But yeah, we presented some numbers. So Lorenzo kind of gave an overview and showing that deep tech, is still very active, especially compared with the rest of the market. How does that compare with what you are seeing on the ground?
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely feeling it, right? If you look at the way the numbers are built over the last 10, 15 years, just increasing momentum in deep tech, more funding flowing into it. Of course, a lot of it is driven over the last couple of years by AI and defense in particular. But yeah, the ecosystem is definitely evolving. We're seeing more early stage investors coming into it. So, whereas 5, 10 years ago when I was doing deep tech investing, there were just no competitive term sheets, right? Because there weren't other funds out there. Increasingly, we're seeing now more great funds out there competing for the best deals and more deep tech companies getting funded. So I'm really excited about where we are today. I think there's still a long way to go. If you look at where we are compared to the US, we're still, I would say, decades behind, but I think we're catching up quickly.
Yeah. So about that, you're saying we're decades behind. There's still like a massive funding gap. How do you deal with that? How can Europe kind of make the best of its competitive advantages?
Yeah, so I think we've got, and we've always had the technical research talent, right? So it's been a strength of Europe and it's something that we need to capitalize on more. I think we've lacked is the entrepreneurial talent. We're starting to see that come through, right? So we've got the deep minds of this world, and there'll be lots of people who say, well, maybe it shouldn't have sold to Google. But actually, if you look at the number of startups that are coming from ex-DeepMind employees that are being spawned across Europe, I think it's fantastic for the continent. I think where we lack at the moment is capital, particularly at the later stages. I think we've seen more capital come into the early stages of deep tech, and that's great. So we're getting the seed rounds away, increasing the Series A's. But when it comes to trying to raise a Series B or a kind of growth round for a deep tech company, it's really hard work. There's no single fund, or maybe there's one or two in Europe that can really put a 15, 20 million check down into a deep tech company and kind of lead it from a European perspective. And we're just not quite at the stage for those companies yet where they can attract international capital. I think once you get to slightly later stage rounds, then you have to bring it in. But yeah, we're definitely missing this gap. So we're starting to see that change, right? There are a couple of funds out there, that are deep tech growth that are trying to raise $1 billion, but they haven't quite closed yet. I think when those vehicles come through, then we'll start to see that gap closing. But yeah, for me, that's really where we need to catch up. But look, venture capital comes in cycles, right? And it starts with a small cycle. You've got small funds that can back companies that have to exit early, right? And the cycles get ever bigger as the kind of funds and exits kind of cycle round and round and round. And the reality is, Silicon Valley was 40 years ahead of Europe. So yeah, we are behind, but I think we're catching up really quickly.
So could it be that this current kind of AI wave and also defense can be like a catalyst to get people more invested in deep tech?
Definitely. Yeah, I absolutely think so. Because the LPs can see it, the governments can see it, right? And it's not just the capital and the talent, you need the market opportunity as well. And so historically, I think the US has done a better job than European governments of being a better procurer of early stage technologies as well. So, and I think that's definitely going to change. You look at the 3.5% NATO commitments that have been made, across a bunch of the NATO member states in Europe. A lot of that money is going to have to flow into innovative new companies, which will inevitably be dual use or deep tech type businesses. So I think that needs to change as well, and we're starting to see that.
Yeah, are you seeing that also with maybe some of your portfolio companies that?
Absolutely. Yeah, so a whole set of them. So Auterion is a great example, right, of a drone kind of operating system software business that has now pivoted more and more into kind of dual use and defense, because obviously, right, the war in Ukraine has driven just an absolute plethora of need for innovation in that space. And so that's a business that said, okay, well, look, here's where the demand is. And with lots of deep tech companies, they are horizontal kind of applications, right? Technologies that have applications in many different areas, and really you're looking for the best customer fit. And suddenly now you've got this real demand in defense, and so we're seeing companies pivot towards that. Absolutely.
Nice. And you mentioned spinouts also there, kind of in the talent equation
Absolutely.
and becoming more entrepreneurial. So
Yeah.
let's kind of pivot to that. Like, yeah, how do you see kind of the spin out landscape as how has it evolved in the last few years?
Yeah, so I'd say it's definitely coming on, right? Historically, we didn't see loads of spin-outs from European universities.
And you've been very close, I guess, to Cambridge and
Absolutely,
Oxford.
right? So grew up in Oxford. I was an undergraduate at Cambridge, PhD at Imperial. So I've been very close to the UK and actually the broader European kind of university landscape as well. My previous role at Octopus, we published a kind of spin-out ranking, right, for the UK universities in terms of which of the universities kind of best at creating investor-ready spin-outs.
Yeah.
That was really insightful. It wasn't, at least the UK universities you'd expect, the kind of Cambridges, Oxfords, they were up there, but there were also some smaller universities that were doing a really good job. And I think for me, there are a couple of things that need to change, right? So equity stakes is clearly one of them, right?
Yeah.
If you're taking 50% of a company as a university, you've compromised that business from
Does that
day
still
zero.
happen?
It does, unfortunately, right? It's not as common, and I think there's a lot more emphasis on it, it being a bad thing for the future of those businesses, but it does still happen. So we're seeing more guidelines come in. We're seeing, more of the universities kind of adopting policies where they say, actually, you know what, we're going to take a fixed percentage, it's going to be small, and we're really going to set these companies up for success, because otherwise, they're kind of hamstringing these businesses from day zero. The other thing I'd like to see change, and I think we're starting to see a little bit, is how quickly you can do those agreements and get those companies out into the wild. Because one of the problems that we've seen in the past is, if you're going to spend 3 years wrangling between a university legal department and a startup as to, who owns the IP, how much, can we license it out, like what about future IP that comes out of this lab, all those types of things. The company's dead before it even leaves the university. And all of the momentum and the kind of entrepreneurial zest to really build something and get going just dies in that process. So we're starting to see some changes. Imperial, ETH, there are a few places which are now adopting these kind of policies where you say, look, this is, publish it. This is what it is. If you want to take this percentage and just take the IP and go, and then off you go. And I'd love to see more of that, frankly.
Do you see also kind of on the student side and a kind of cultural shift that more of them are thinking about that as a kind of a career move to launch a startup?
Yeah. When I left university and was doing my PhD, it was still most of my colleagues as kind of physicists or STEM graduates were going into finance, frankly. And that was the kind of, what you wanted to be doing. Let's get a job in banking or consulting, something like this. I think the banking kind of crisis, the financial crisis 2008, right? That put a kind of bad feeling into the banking and consulting sectors. And today, you talk to undergraduates, it's cool to be an entrepreneur. They want to start businesses. So that's fantastic, because it means we've got this whole generation of new entrepreneurs coming through who really want to start businesses, and then they're going through the university ecosystem and saying, well, actually, like I can see, and I'm thinking about where this technology might have an application out in the real world. So fantastic.
Amazing. So last topic, you mentioned on stage, like future of compute is one of the areas that you're very excited about. I'm sure there are more, but just wanted to zoom in on that.
Yeah, of course.
You mentioned photonics, neuromorphic computing. Maybe let's start with what do those terms mean for you, and then we can talk about what you're seeing that excites you in those areas.
Yeah, of course. Well, look, for the last 70 years, right, computing has basically been done the same way. So we're using electrons and ones and zeros, right, in terms of logic to do compute. Increasingly going forwards, the advances that we've got out of pushing that technology, so silicon, as far as we possibly can, are tapering off. And if we want to continue to push the boundaries of how much computing we can do, and frankly we're going to need to, given the demands that are being asked of compute from AI workloads, we're going to need new technologies. So when I talk about kind of photonic kind of approaches, that's using light essentially instead of electrons to do either the computing work or to do the communication work. And we're seeing both, right? So that's computers made out of devices that can manipulate light, and that's also on the communication side, or doing your compute using electrons and then shipping the information from one place to another using light. And we're doing that a little bit with kind of fiber optic cables, which I think most people are familiar with, but increasingly we're seeing those kind of fiber optic cables make their way, instead of just getting data to your home, now transferring data between computers and data centers, for example.
Yeah, so then it would mean your computer doesn't get hot and...
Doesn't get hot, that's right. Light, if you can do it efficiently, converting electrons into light, then the light can travel really large distances, short distances. It can transmit a massive amount of data compared to electrons.
And where are we kind of in that journey, and which areas of that excite you the most, and especially within Europe?
Yeah. So at the moment we don't really have photonic computers. So there's a whole new kind of architecture of computing. We're starting to see some early companies kind of coming through. There've been a couple in the US. There's some ones I'm quite excited about in Europe at the moment that we're tracking. On the kind of communication side, it has been happening. Obviously, at home now, I get fiber to the house. So we've had some of this happening, but increasingly we're seeing the constraint in terms of the ability to communicate, going into the data center. And so now, if you look in a data center, if you've got these big racks of kind of computers,
so that's maybe the next frontier is data centers.
Exactly. So we've already got a little bit of light-based communication in there, but I think we're going to see more and more and more. And I think the ultimate end goal is electrons still good for doing compute, probably on small chips, but then chip-to-chip communications happening via light. But that means you've got to get fiber optics into the chips somehow, and that, I think, is a big step, but there's some exciting stuff going on in Europe there.
Okay, and what about neuromorphic computing?
Yeah, so again, like the way that computing happens was pretty much standardized for the last 100 years, right? We use digital compute, these ones and zeros. But there are lots of different ways of building computers. I mean, if you go back 150 years, people were building them with cogs and water, right, in order to do compute. So there's no restriction on how you do compute using different technologies. And so we're starting to see now people experiment again, given that we're hitting some of the limits of what we can do with digital compute, starting to experiment with analog compute, or kind of trying to replicate, I guess, some of the way that the brain works, but actually in the electronics rather than just in the software layer.
Okay.
So that's what I mean by neuromorphic compute. So neuro kind of replicating the kind of physical processes that happen in your brain, but maybe on a physical device that sits outside of the body.
So in how many years do you think we'll have the first
new types of computer?
New types of computer, yeah.
I think it's a few years away, right? And the problem is the existing industry, semiconductor industry, is surprisingly risk averse, given that it's absolutely the bleeding edge of technology. When it comes to adopting kind of wholly new technology paradigms, they have historically been quite reluctant to do that, and you can understand that there's a huge amount of capital that's been invested in that industry. You can't change it overnight. So I think we'll see them quite soon, right? But it might be in niche applications. So things like ultra high frequency trading, for example, where every nanosecond that you can do a calculation faster or communicate faster means big differences in terms of your ability to trade, in those kind of timescales. And that's a relatively small application, but they're willing to adopt new technologies, because if you can get a small edge over your competitors, it means a big difference. So I think over the next few years, actually, we'll start to see those. I also include quantum computing as part of the kind of future of compute, and that's a very exciting area too.
Yeah, makes sense. And that one is maybe a bit further out, or?
I still think we're probably 3 to 5 years away from having, fault-tolerant quantum computers that can do really useful work. But every year we see technical advances. So for me, it's a when, not if now, right? I think if you went back 5 years, there's a kind of, can we make this work at all? Now, no doubt in my mind, we will have quantum computers, and they will be absolutely game-changing. I think we're only a few years away from it.
And what will be Europe's role?
I hope. I mean, you saw from some of the data that we're kind of behind from a European perspective in terms of the foundational models, right? And that's partly because the US has just absolutely piled capital into this space. So we've got Mistral, it's great, but you look at the number of model businesses, the amount that they raised comparatively in the US, it's huge. I would like to think that when the quantum computing wave comes around in the same way that it has done for foundational models, Europe will be in a position where actually, we can pile money into those winners because we do have them, right? We've done an excellent job in funding the research base, funding the early stage companies. We've got several unicorns already in quantum computing within Europe. I just really want to see us capitalize on those successes and make sure they go on to kind of global success.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, amazing. Well, I want to thank you for your time.
Thanks, Yoram. It's always great.
Yeah,
Great to work with Dealroom and great to be here.
fantastic. And yeah, have an amazing slush.
Yeah, thank
All
you
right,
very much.
thanks.
Cool.